How's it going, all you Photographiliacs? I'm your host, B. Smitty. I just want to start off this episode by also uploading these podcast episodes to YouTube. So I'm kind of expanding the range of awareness and just reach in general to the podcast. Obviously, they'll be posted to these podcast stations as they normally are. And to be honest, they'll be there first. Whether you're listening to Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, they'll be uploaded there first, and then YouTube at a later time, whether it's the same day or next day. It's just a different process. So I'll be doing that though. I'm actually going to try to get all the episodes from Jeffrey Dahmer forward up, and I'll probably make a little bit of a teaser video. I talked about that on a previous podcast episode, but I'm making like a little short podcast teaser that will be on the YouTubes. I may even just upload that separately on all stations as well, just for the fun of it. And yeah, so that's where we're at with that. And I think we just let's get right into this episode here. Ronald Edward Galella was born January 10th, 1931. He was a photographer, and he is known as, he was dubbed a paparazzo extraordinaire by Newsweek, and the Godfather of U.S. paparazzi culture by Time Magazine and Vanity Fair. He is regarded by Harper's Bazaar as arguably the most controversial paparazzo of all time. As was often the case, Galella didn't take photo credit to. He didn't want to. It's kind of like he was just working the streets. He didn't want to be known. Kind of like the whole Banksy gimmick. Just trying to, be unknown. While you're just trying to get all these personal type photos of celebrity. Galella discovered photography in the Air Force. Anticipating he'd be drafted during the Korean War, he enlisted in 1951 and took his first photography lessons while being trained in camera repair. After reading glamour photographer Peter Gowland's book, How to Photograph Women, Galella decided photography would be a diabolically good way to meet girls. After discharge, he used the GI Bill to fund his way through art school in California. He made his first real money shooting kids with Santa at Christmas time at a discount department store in New Jersey. I always wonder about that, with photographers. Just not like a paparazzi photographer, but just in general, like, besides like, the who situation. Like, it's more so like, how do they make money from the start? Was it shooting weddings or senior photos? And I thought it was interesting to read shooting kids with Santa at Christmas. Never really think of that too often, as because usually when I see it's kind of like, well, these days, also back then it's a lot different. Like now it's like, you go and you can take pictures of your phone or whatever, unless you go to like a fancier one. So Galella began crashing movie premieres to shoot famous people, and learned that there was a market for such shots in down-market celebrity magazines like the National Enquirer and Photoplay. In 1970, he abandoned the Santa gig and became a full-time paparazzo. It's definitely a way, especially, now too, but back then, to go out in the streets, and make money photographically, especially like those, grocery store magazines. They're always looking for content. So I think he always had a problem with, certain things when he was younger. Like, so, if there was a chip on his shoulder, it was about privilege and status. His career built on selling to publications what termed no appointment portraits. of often unwilling people for $25 a piece. The going rate for magazines and tabloids in the 70s and 80s. Meanwhile, Avedon Irving Penn earned thousands to shoot willing models and actors in the comfort of a studio, a process that Galella deems criminally easy. Galella said, quote, "They were studio photographers, and I'm glad that I didn't have the money to get into a studio." He continued, quote, "I could do studio photography, but it was best that I was forced to make my world the studio. There's no other photos that are as great as my paparazzi photos." And his first rule while out photographing was shoot everybody, regardless of whether he actually knew who they were or not. And I actually talked about something similar to that. It was about like 3 years ago or so. I was out photographing in the streets with Larky, and there's like a few times where I pulled my camera up and didn't take the picture and continued on. And this is just of just everyday things, like just out in the streets. And I like really questioned myself about that. It's just like, I need to just, if I'm thinking about photographing it, just photograph it. I mean, it makes way more sense now than it even did then, because now, once you have your camera, the cost of taking a picture is $0 and 0 cents. So that's one thing I've done a lot more now is I actually just photograph a lot more when I'm out shooting. And so back in 1979, when he was 48, he married 31-year-old Betty Burke, a photo editor for a Washington, D.C.-based Sunday supplement called Today is Sunday. He used to call her in a professional capacity, and her voice had initially reminded him of Jackie's. He had a huge obsession with Jackie Onassis, which ended up being a documentary, I think in 2012, I think was when that was released. They finally met face-to-face, him and Burke, at a Washington premiere of Superman. He said, quote, "I danced with her at the event, and then I shacked up with her at a hotel." They married 5 months later, and Betty joined Big Daddy in the car with. She used to call him Big Daddy, with her own cameras, pursuing likes of Katharine Hepburn. So with him, probably might have been some of a plan on his part to kind of get more involved with publication. So she would eventually take over all aspects of Galella's business. Galella said, quote, "She was a very good businesswoman. She made me rich." Galella's own childhood may explain his paparazzi actions later in life. He remembers his parents fighting constantly. Vincenzo, who his mom ended up exiling. So Vincenzo was his dad, and his mom ended up basically making his dad live in the basement. And it would just basically be drunk and just preaching to his dad would get drunk all the time, preaching on importance of making and saving money. And Galella really took to this and became stingy as an adult. And his wife, she would call him Big Daddy, said that he was as tight as bark in a tree. For a time, his dad Vincenzo kept a rabbit that had been gifted to him in the basement, where its white fur turned gray from the coal used from fire in the furnace. The Galella and his siblings became, they really loved this rabbit. And one day the dad cooked it in the stew. Galella went on to say one day that, quote, "We cried." And Galella, who never had children, would populate his estate later in life with rabbits. Both, having a cemetery with rabbit statues and houses, remains of his 6 bunnies. It's just like he had a whole. I think that just kind of, when he was a kid, that kind of scarred him. And, ended up just kind of, stayed with him for the rest of his life. So to say that Galileo, the godfather of U.S. paparazzi culture, is obsessed with Jackie Onassis is an understatement. Galileo took literally thousands of photos of Jackie from 1968 through 1981, and his photographs remain the most revealing images of her in existence. So I held that our collective memory of Jackie is kind of they're photos that you've seen before, and so it may very well be something that when you think of an image of Jackie Onassis, it actually very well may be a photograph that Galileo had shot. And Galileo had to deal with constant hurdles of court battles with Jackie, restraining orders, and heavy fines because Jackie put up a grand front of personal privacy. Fashion designer and director Tom Ford was right on the money when he said, ironically, the very photographs that Mrs. Onassis resisted were the ones that define her as an icon. And just when you thought you'd seen every iconic image of Jackie, there's a 400-page, never before published book, and she was Galileo ended up saying, quote, "She was and still is the most famous, most photographed woman in the world. And I believe only Elvis could meet or exceed her level of fame." So he was he was definitely obsessed with Onassis, and obviously really kind of himself with that body of work, I guess, if you want to call it that, of Onassis. I think, he that was his world, and that's kind of how he ended up feeling about it, I guess. Galileo was known for his obsessive treatment of Onassis and subsequent legal battles associated with it. The New York Post called it the most codependent celeb paparazzi relationship ever. The 1972 free speech trial, Galileo vs. Onassis, resulted in a restraining order to keep Galileo 50 yards, which was later changed to 25 feet away from Onassis. He was found guilty of breaking this order 4 times and faced 7 years in jail and $120,000 fine, later settling for a $10,000 fine and surrendering his rights to photograph Jackie or her children. So I kind of wonder how that kind of came about, I guess it's maybe one of those things like, all right, yeah, let's just do this and, let's move on from it, maybe. That's kind of what I'm thinking. On June 12th, 1973, Marlon Brando punched Galileo in the face outside a restaurant in Chinatown, New York City, breaking the photographer's jaw and knocking out 5 of his teeth on the left side of his mouth. Galileo had been following Brando, who was accompanied by Dick Cavett, to the restaurant after taping of the Dick Cavett show earlier that day. Galileo hired a lawyer named Stuart Schlesinger, that's kind of how I'm going to go with that, to sue Brando, and ultimately settled for $40,000. The lawyer reported in the 2010 documentary Smash His Camera that Galileo received 2/3, but only cared about getting the message out. He said, quote, "I don't want anyone to think they can go around punching me if I am taking their picture. Get that story out, not the money." Subsequently, the next time Galileo chased Brando, he wore a football helmet, which actually there's actually a photograph of that, Galileo wearing a helmet next to Brando, and I put up on the Instagram, so if you want to check out Photographiliac pod on Instagram, I posted it there, which is pretty funny. But he's right. You just can't punch people. That's just. Galileo once lost a tooth when he was beaten by Richard Burton's security guards. He unsuccessfully sued the actor. Elizabeth Taylor, who tended to be tolerant towards photographers, was often heard to mutter, "I'm going to kill Ron." She said, quote, "I'm going to kill Ron Galileo." Although the actress would later use his photographs in her biography. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing, which is actually quoted later on somewhere in the outline where, there's like, paparazzi, and, it's definitely it is an invasion of privacy, but, you don't really have that privacy when you're walking the sidewalks and the streets and stuff like that either. But a lot of the times, a lot of celebrities try to reuse or use, these photos, which, it's one of those things, which kind of just depends on. Well, a lot of people think it's like their photo if it's of them, and that's not the case either. If you don't already know this, Kim Kardashian actually hires photographers to basically pose paparazzi style photos so she can post them. So she don't have to pay out a lot of money to have paparazzi style photos when she's like wanting to kind of like show off certain brands or whatever, walking out of a store. So there's that aspect too of celebrity that just they embrace that. They don't really deal with actual paparazzi and hire their own. So other celebrities that he photographed included Elvis Presley, whose bodyguards slashed his tires, Bridget Bardot, whose security staff hosed him down, and Sean Penn, who spit at him and reportedly punched him while being photographed with his then-wife Madonna. In September 1969, Galila leapt out of bushes in Central Park to photograph Jackie and 8-year-old JFK Jr. biking. According to Jackie, John nearly rode into Fifth Avenue traffic out of fright, and Jackie, according to Galila, shouted, quote, "Smash his camera." Secret Service agents handcuffed him and drove him to the nearest police precinct. He sued on the First Amendment grounds. Yeah, that kind of, like I was saying earlier, you can't like punch someone and stuff, but I think you gotta not jump out of bushes either. You know what I mean? I think I think there's times when you're out, photographing. There's times that you're just being crazy. Taking things kind of, it's weird to say it, but taking it unprofessionally. But it's just my opinion. Aristotle Onassis approached him on Fifth Avenue and asked him what it would take to settle the matter. And Galila responded, quote, $1 million. And then sent the couple a Christmas card bearing the image of Onassis look-alike in a Santa outfit. Galila on his lap receiving cash. Jackie countersued. This is kind of what I'm saying. If you're gonna do it, be professional, then it is what it is. You know what I mean? It's part of it, paparazzi. But I think there's obviously a line that's crossed. My opinion. So she countersued, and in 1972 they came face to face in court. She testified it was like what it was like to leave the house knowing Galila was there. Jackie said, quote, "He lunged at me and he was grunting, and he was saying, quote, 'Glad to see me back, Jackie, aren't you, baby?' And then he took his camera strap and was flicking me on the shoulders." And Galila denied this. Galila's justification for his obsession didn't help. It came up in court that he had told Aristotle Onassis that he thought his daily stalking of Jackie would, quote, help her forget the trauma of sitting next to JFK when he was assassinated in Dallas, which is pretty disturbing, if you ask me. A judge eventually ruled that Galila would need to stay 25 feet away from Jackie and 50 feet away from the kids. And in 1974, Galila published his first book, Jacqueline, in which he confessed, quote, "I don't need to take pictures of Jackie nude. In hot pants, yes. In a bikini, sure." He confesses to me if he encountered Jackie in the raw, he naturally would have taken the shot, continuing to quote, but probably not released it. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. After the court order, he said, quote, "I don't know if Jackie thinks about me anymore. Maybe she does. Does she miss me? Who knows?" But then the following year, he flew to Los Angeles, posing delightfully 3 feet away from Jackie's head with a measuring tape prop that marked 25 feet and keep your distance. which is another thing. It's just being like, this isn't being a paparazzi, if you ask me. In 1981, Jackie went back to court and on Gula's violations, and a judge ruled he'd be fined $120,000 and jailed 6 years if he ever shot a photo of her again. In spite of these controversies, art galleries across the world have valued his work for its artistic and historical value. He was praised by Andy Warhol, who said, quote, "My idea of a good picture is one that's in focus and of a famous person doing something unfamous. It's being in the right place at the wrong time. That's why my favorite photographer is Ron Galella." In 2002, when curator and editor Stephen Bludall dug deep into the archives to produce the photographs of Ron Galella, which collected his best work from 1965 to 1989, it was precisely the hurried and invasive quality of his photos that earned them the artistic recognition. Stephen said, quote, "Ron had always been not well liked, always sort of in the gutter with everyone, but I thought it was time for the snapshot aesthetic and paparazzi photography to be sort of a highbrow." Gucci sponsored its print and run, and Tom Ford wrote the introduction, acknowledging that Galella's images had long served as an inspiration for his fashion, and that he said, quote, "Ironically, the very photographs that Mrs. Onassis resisted were the ones that defined her as an icon." Over time, Galella's method had become an aesthetic, and collectors felt comfortable spending large sums of them as works of art, no different than portraits of willing subjects. Al Pacino and Diane Keaton attended the premiere party for Sea of Love in 1989. Diane Keaton, one of Galella's targets, conceded in her foreword to the photographs of Ron Galella that after looking at his collected work, she was grateful that he was there to annoy her and her famous friends, capturing them looking their unrehearsed best, noting, quote, "To see Warren Beatty and Al Pacino in Ron Galella's book, to be reminded how remarkable they were. Now they, like me, are older." He remains the only paparazzo most people know by name. He is mostly retired, but still photographs the Met Gala every spring. When he's not in rehab, Galella lives alone in a mansion in New Jersey. He's waiting out the coronavirus pandemic, and with the help of home aid. And the entire first floor is a gallery of huge framed prints of his most famous images. The basement is stuffed floor to ceiling with his catalog archive of photographs shot between 1952 all the way to the present. It's a staggering body of work. 3 million photographs taken by Galella and the 15 or so different photographers he employed over the years to be where he couldn't. So he ended up kind of making just a crew, when he knew if he knew an event was going on, and had to deal with the magazines and all that, so he would just work out commissions and that type of deal. In 2004, his knees were shot from decades spent in the hot pursuit in the streets. He gave up shooting to devote his time to what he calls, quote, "a harvest of my life," writing books and overseeing the digitization of his vast basement archive of 3 million photographs for Getty. His wife Betty, a lifelong smoker, died in 2016 of emphysema. Galella said, quote, "She died in her sleep, thank God. She didn't suffer. She was on the oxygen. I brought her the tray of food, and I put her in her bed. Figured she was going to eat later, and I go back, and she was dead. She never touched the food. She was my love." Galella authored an entire book on what he calls the, quote, "paparazzi approach," a phrase he trademarked featuring 22 distinct techniques. Galella's Jackie legacy is complicated. His photos are revered by those who worship the iconic First Lady for her poise and style. But according to Jackie herself, they came at an immeasurable cost to her and her own psychological well-being. Galella, she testified, was ruining her life. his constant presence lurking outside her Fifth Avenue apartment and following her as far as Greece meant she had, quote, no peace of mind, was always under surveillance, imprisonment in my house. Galileo finally stopped in 1981, not out of compassion or boredom, but because a judge promised he'd throw Galileo in jail for 60 years if he got anywhere near the former First Lady. It's this controversial association that made him the most famous paparazzo in the world. Galileo's most famous image is the image of Jackie Onassis on Madison Avenue in New York, taken in 1971. It's titled Windblown Jackie. As for Jackie, he's now willing to entertain a dark suggestion Aristotle Onassis once offered many years ago on Fifth Avenue. Galileo said, quote, maybe Jackie looked upon me as a sniper shooting her, like Oswald. Continued, quote, I can't know that. It's a psychological thing. That's a mystery. We don't know what she was thinking, but I don't think so, because the photograph shows she's smiling, pleasant, positive, so I feel like I was doing no harm, that I was doing good. Yeah, the whole statement, the Oswald statement, I mean, that's another just disturbing footnote in this whole story of the obsession of Galileo and Onassis, and just kind of the things that he did to kind of, she was quoted, say that basically that, essentially ruining her life in a way, just always having to think about, again, if he was just out in the streets, like just photographing her, and even if he was there a lot, even as much as he was, but if that's all he was doing was, being a photographer, I do question if she would have had those thoughts, I think the way that he was as a human being, kind of made those thoughts, his actions, and but that's just my opinion on that. I'd definitely like to know your opinion, what your thoughts on this is. Obviously, he has a kind of a crazy history, when it comes to paparazzi photography, and again, it's more so from his actions, not by the photographs. It's even said that, it's been quoted that just because of, getting that jail time, being threatened of 60 years in prison if you photograph this person one more time. It's pretty crazy, and it's a interesting story, and I'm gonna kind of look into a little bit more paparazzi type stuff for the future, but I wanted to start off with this one, just because of the the extreme version of, just doing all you can to kind of make something happen. Just like when I was saying about the bushes in Central Park, like, was it necessary to be in a bush? No. Even if you're a paparazzi, a paparazzo, and you're photographing a person often, and you're gonna get the chances if you don't get the chance, right? If you sit in Central Park, she sees him from a distance, she reels the other way. Missed opportunity, right? It is what it is. I think once you're like climbing in a bush and jumping out at her and her son, that's 8 years old, that's a whole different, that's a whole different thing. But anyways, definitely, leave me some comments on what you think. And I just want to say thank you for listening to this episode. And hit me up on Patreon. If you go to Photographiliac.com, it takes you straight to my Patreon page, and have a lot of bonus content going on there. It's actually going to be a nice mix of bonus podcast content and my own photography content, so it's kind of be a nice little mix of things. And I also want to show community things within Patreon, and eventually talk to them on the podcast as well. I think that'd be a fun thing to do, is build like a fun community and expand from it. And I'll definitely give you a shout out. Become a patron on again it's photographiliac.com, takes you straight to it. And then my Instagram for this podcast is Photographiliac Pod. If you're big on the Twitter, it's at photographypod. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's about it. We do have some merch, photographiliacshop.com. And I hope everyone has a great day. I appreciate your support. I'll talk to you soon.